Welcome back to Soul Shift, the podcast where real life, science, and soul all get a seat at the table. I'm Mindy Gorman-Pletzer, and I'm here with my beautiful co-hosts Christine Morgenstern-Shin and Allie Anderson. If you're new to Soul Shift, this is a space for people, especially women in midlife, who are navigating big shifts in their bodies, their relationships, their work, and their sense of self. We talk about the moments that change us, the nervous system behind it all, and how to come home to yourself in the sometimes very messy middle of it. Today, we're talking about one of the most seismic shifts a woman can experience, divorce. Not the logistics of it, not the legal process, but the deep identity crisis that follows. Questions arise. Who am I without this relationship? Who was I before I became who I thought I needed to be? And how do I rebuild a life that actually feels like mine? Our guest today knows this territory intimately. Katie Jordan is a certified life coach and co-author of the best-selling book, Start Up, Start Over, Just Start. After navigating a season marked by deep grief, including profound personal loss and a life-changing divorce, she found herself searching for a way forward. Through that journey of healing and growth, she discovered she wasn't alone. There were women everywhere, strong, capable women in leadership who felt stuck, lost, and unsure of their next steps. Katie is a graduate of Stage Leaders, and she now uses both her life experience and professional training to guide divorced women back to themselves. Her work is rooted in the truth that life after divorce does not have to stop, does not have to be shameful, and we are allowed to rebuild and create a life that feels good and brings us peace.
Welcome to Soul Shift, a sacred space where modern science, ancient wisdom, and real life come together in perfect harmony.
Each week, we explore the gentle art of transformation. Soul Shift holds space for your beautiful, messy, perfectly imperfect human experience.
Meaningful change doesn't have to break you open. It can unfold softly, like morning light.
Together, we'll uncover tools that honor your truth, share conversations that touch your soul, and celebrate the exquisite complexity of what it means to be human.
Your presence here is a gift. Let's shift with grace,
With love.
Together.
Katie, welcome to Soul Shift. We are so grateful to have you here.
I am so excited to be here with you as well. It means a lot to be here right now.
Oh, thank you, Katie. So, let's dive in. When a woman first comes to you in the aftermath of divorce, what's the story she's actually telling herself about who she is now, who she thinks she became? And I'm especially curious because you work with women in leadership, women who may be incredibly capable in their professional lives, but suddenly feel completely lost in their personal ones. So what are they believing about themselves?
Well, here's what happens. We all put on this brave space, whether you're in a corporate leadership, you're in a leadership of your home, you've now just become the CEO and run everything at home once you're divorced. So you have the finances. If you have children, the logistics of that, the back and forth of the children. And you don't know who you are because you've given so much to everybody else. I remember very distinctly that after my divorce, I would come home from my corporate job every day and be like, now what? Because I was putting on such a brave face at work, nobody even knew what was going on. Very few people knew that. And I was expected to support everybody else, but who was supporting me? And there wasn't that. And it's just kind of like that, oh, great, I'm starting over, but how do I start?
Yeah. And then I think we need to also address that shame piece, right? where does the shame come from? And how does a woman begin to release it? She's feeling so successful in one area of her life, and perhaps, unfortunately, she's not feeling that otherwise.
It's kind of like that I can hold it all together at work, but then it's falling apart. And it still brings back a lot of emotions because I didn't even tell my own family for like 3 months after we were separated. We sold the house, we moved into separate places, and our daughter was now going through this back and forth as well. And the shame for me was multifaceted. I come from a family of majority of them, I'm talking aunts and uncles, and my parents have all been married 40 plus years. So the divorce word was not really talked about. I was that one off. I was like, what is wrong with me that I couldn't sustain this marriage? And it wasn't about what's wrong with me. It's about how do I need to adjust and move forward? And when I say adjust, something happened. It was probably 3 years after the separation that I was finally like, okay, I can actually talk about this. At work, I supported flight attendants. And so many of them, after I started actually talking about it, like in person, in social media, that was where I was kind of able to release that shame. And so many people would come back and say, well, how come I didn't even know you were going through that? Because I didn't want to be seen as a failure. And then for me, there was that people pleaser aspect of it as well. But I'm now happy to say I'm reforming, so that's not that's not as much of an issue as it used to be.
Yeah, I get that. And again, it goes back to how we feel about ourselves, relationship to self, right? And particularly it goes back to that question of who was I before the world told me who I needed to be?
I used to say when I was an instructor, I don't know who they is, but they gets us in a lot of trouble, right? They tell us what we should be as a mom, what we should be as a wife, how we should show up as an employee or a leader, right? I would give they a piece of my mind now if I knew who they were. It's just been such an amazing journey. And the last 10 months have really been so eye-opening. And to know that I'm raising a small human that looks up to me and says, okay, she'll be 9 this summer. And she looks up to me and says, okay, if my mommy can do this and we can do this by ourselves, that's what she says, I can do anything I want. And that's what I want her to take away from it. But I also want to empower other women that they don't have to shrink after a divorce. This is stepping into your next chapter, feeling excited, releasing that shame, and embracing what is next.
So do you think that your coming out, so to speak, your vulnerability, your willingness to speak the truth was one of the first steps for you in releasing that shame? And then that is the behavior you are modeling for other women that you are mentoring, as well as what you're modeling at home?
Yes.
I think that's really a very important point to hold on to, because I think we can apply that principle to so many areas of life as women, as leaders, as professionals, as we go forward. What are we modeling?
I believe that's 1,000% true. Being able to speak about it, or even just say that I was divorced, was like a weight off of my shoulders. Another example of that is back in 2016, I think, we had a miscarriage. And losing a child was devastating. And I didn't know. I mean, I knew my sisters had gone through that and some things like that. But the parallel here is until you go through something sometimes, you don't know how common it is. You know, there are so many women that have miscarriages, but we're not talking about that because, society wants us to have this perfect little family with, the white picket fence. I don't even think it's that anymore. It's probably something different. But it's that honesty with yourself. And when we start to talk about those things that have been traumatic in our lives, it not only is free for us, but it also gives others the hope that what they're going through, it's going to be okay. This is a little blip in time. When you look at your whole life timeline, this is like a millimeter. But when you're in it, it feels like the ocean is swallowing you whole.
Katie, so much of what you're talking about, when you mentioned earlier hiding shame, and then you talk about coming out of it and being very open with your story, I'd love to explore something that I suspect can be quite invisible in divorce recovery, especially those women who are not quite open about it. Like you mentioned, for you, it was kind of difficult to be open about it in the beginning. And I imagine that years of fitting into a relationship and a relationship that isn't quite working, that doesn't just live in the woman's mind, but I imagine it lives in her body too. It reminds me of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is just a brilliant book. And I'm thinking about women who've been in these relationships that maybe weren't fully working, but they kept showing up, they kept doing the work, they kept trying, they kept adjusting, they kept cleaning the kitchen, whatever it was they needed to do. And over time, I imagine this has to land somewhere, right? This pressure. So I'm curious what you've seen. How does this show up in the woman's body when she's been carrying something like this for so long? And then ultimately it ends in something that maybe it was her choice or maybe it wasn't, but
right. I think I've seen it not only in my own life, but in some of my clients as well, causing health issues.
Sure, I believe
right? We do a lot of, I know I used to be really good at this, and I don't know if it's now my age or my growth. We're going to say it's growth. I used to be really good at stuffing things down. And it's okay, whatever, we'll get through it. But that doesn't do any of us any good, right? I have an autoimmune. It's funny because I don't think of it that way, but it really is, I guess. I have celiac. So I have to be very aware of the things that I eat. And in times of high stress, when we're not really processing things, that is not a fun experience because our body is telling us, hello, you're not doing something you should be.
Yeah.
And I have other women that I work with currently that are going through as they come out of that relationship and are going through some of their health issues. But I think, as we learn to trust ourselves again, too, that healing can begin from the inside out.
And really recognize what's going on inside the body, right? Beyond just the mind. That's so important. I've heard you mention before, you have advice that you'd love to give your younger self. And I think most of us have some kind of advice we'd love to give our younger self, right? But I would love to hear from you. What would you tell your younger self today?
I actually found myself saying this to my daughter the other day, is to never forget to trust yourself. It's those days that are getting us in trouble. They tell us this is what we're supposed to do, but somewhere along the way, it's either fitting in, people pleasing, different things like that, that we lose our self-trust and our intuition. It gets covered up. It's harder to hear. And we have to allow ourselves to trust ourselves so that we can move forward. I'm getting really good, and I've had a lot of practice lately about listening to myself. So it's taken work, but when I reflect back where I was at 5 years ago, it was about this time in April 5 years ago that we were getting ready to put our house on the market. And we always used to joke that we like to do everything big. We had our child 6 months later. We moved 2 states away. We do all these things. But April and May for me can be very emotional months. In 2017, I lost my grandmother. 2018, I lost my father. We all know where we were at in 2020, but I also lost my sister to brain cancer in 2020.
Oh, Katie.
And then in 2021, I found myself in immense grief again, losing my marriage. And I say all of this, and I'm not looking for people to be, no. I say this to give other people hope that what you're going through, you can make it. Okay? Like there is that light at the end of the tunnel, right? The tunnel doesn't end, the light just shifts and it gets brighter as we work through things. Grief doesn't ever completely go away. It just shows up differently. Today I was reconnecting with a friend who I haven't seen in 16 years. We're sitting outside of a coffee shop and I found myself very distracted by all the butterflies around us.
Wonderful.
And Mindy and I have had this conversation, but I always think when I see yellow butterflies, it reminds me of my sister. It's okay for those things to make us emotional. That's another thing we need to stop apologizing for, is having emotions. Because it was just a sweet moment. The butterflies being there and they're reconnecting. So it is okay for us to reconnect to ourselves.
I think, Katie, what you shared is so insightful. I think it'll help a lot of people understand it's not just me, when it comes to grief. You mentioned how it could be held in the body and then how it's completely different for each of us. And then also, you shared some really hard griefs, right? Not just one, but several. And I'm sure each person affected you differently, right? In each type of situation, whether using COVID as an example or your divorce, right? And so, I look a lot of our world through the nervous system perspective. And I like how you mentioned about how, our feelings and whether it's shame or grief or how we're moving through, big life transitions like divorce can show up in the body. You know that if you're overly stressed, there might be a flare, you might have a reaction, right? We talk some about the physicality. I want to shift to our identity. Like, I have an identity as a wife. And when we have an identity that we build our entire adult life with this one other person and it disappears, especially if it's been a long-term marriage, how do you think that shows up in the body? Because I know from a nervous system perspective, you could feel imbalanced, like uneven, like untethered, right? So what do you think is happening in women's bodies, specifically with their nervous system during the transition of divorce?
I go back to the example of my daughter, right? She was 4. And she's looking at me like, "Oh, why is mom crying again? What is going on?" She'd never been away from us, separate from us, except for the time that I had been away for a training that I had to go to for 4 weeks. But I remember her going home, going back to our other home. We've always called them homes, buckling her in the seatbelt. We have a fun little thing that we were like Pac-Man, and instead of chomping, we would throw hearts and she would catch them with her mouth.
No.
It's a little more subtle these days because she's now a big girl. But as they drove away, there was such a pit an emptiness in my stomach that I was like, how am I going to go on? Because this person is looking at me. What am I supposed to do when I don't even know what I'm supposed to do myself? And that's where I started the journaling and the meditation, even more so because I knew that no matter what I did, she was going to be watching.
Mm-hmm. I think what's beautiful is you're sharing, you're self-regulating, right? Through the journaling and through the meditation. And then once you become grounded, then you can co-regulate with her. If she sees happy mom, right? Grounded mom, then just by being in the same space, your nervous systems will key up, they'll sync up in a
Very
beautiful
much
way.
so.
Yeah. I love that you're doing that intuitively, And so do you then help women? How you said it's chaotic, the nervous system's chaotic. Is that something you all talk about in terms of, giving them simple activities like the journaling or the meditation?
That is part of it because you're in a world that feels, just like you were saying, very dysregulated. And you have to figure out how to start bringing yourself back. And that's one of the first things that we do is some simple meditation or gratitude and some journaling, because it's amazing, right? How the brain works when everything feels like it's working against you.
Mhm.
But then you start to remember all of those things that you have to be grateful for. And it starts to rewire, and you're like, okay, the first few times I did this was really hard to be grateful for anything. But then when you start looking at it differently, you do see that. And you kind of get out of your own way a little bit, I think.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is something that goes to the heart of your work, and that is helping women rediscover what they lost when they spent years, decades in some cases, trying to fit into someone else's idea of who they need to be.
I was just thinking about us talking about, a spouse versus a partner, and if we were in the 50s, there were these certain expectations of spouses, right? But I think now in this day and age, it should be more of a partnership because you are in that cohesiveness together. And I'm not saying I am not anti-marriage, not anti-partner or anything like that, but I just think sometimes when we take a step back, I realize things like I hadn't taken a bath in I don't know how long. And I didn't think I liked baths. But now you give me a good bubble bath and I'll see you later. So there's a lot of coming back to yourself because you don't know who that is.
And then that coming back to yourself is probably the greatest gift of all.
Yeah. And Katie, I also hear you saying you're giving yourself permission to let go of maybe who you thought you were before. You were a person who didn't like bubble baths before, but you gave yourself permission, I'm going to let that go. And I'm going to become a person who loves bubble baths and accept that and honor that and embrace that. I think that's really special to honor that it's okay to change in this process.
I know for me, it is easier for me to give someone else grace than it is for me to give myself grace. And the other day, this is how important it is to have people around us who truly support us and cheer us on. The other day, my best friend was here with us visiting, and I said something. I don't even remember what I said. And she looked at me and she goes, "You're not going to talk to my friend that way." And I was like, oh, whoa, a reality check, because I didn't even realize I had said anything, hurtful. So I think surrounding ourselves too by others who are truly going to support and cheer you on is huge in any life transition.
I think that's so powerful. Like two things, how you do speak to yourself, right? And the fact that you have people around you, like a support community or a support team around you that are there in your best interests, you know? And I know through your work that you help people rewrite their story. And I think, healing from the inside out, it does start, with our thoughts and then creating, once you feel grounded, then, okay, who are my support people through it, And if I'm a client of yours and I want to rewrite my story, how do you help me put those steps into place? Like, where would we start?
When you go through these things and you're not on the other side, but you move through it in a different way, right? You see, sometimes you're like, man, that is the simplest practice. But sometimes we have to remind ourselves that the simplest practice for us where we are now wasn't simple when we started, right? And it's taking them through that kind of 3 areas: freedom, the fulfillment, and then the flight. So the freedom is that coming back to yourself, doing those simple practices consistently that builds upon that. And then the fulfillment of, okay, what are the things I like to do? And flipping that script of, oh my gosh, my daughter is gone, to, oh my gosh, what do I get to do to fill my cup while she's gone? Now I do some crazy networking stuff and business building, but it is thinking about your life now and how to be in a more positive mindset of something that could be seen as really negative and turning it into a positive. Because what happens in this instance, when my daughter comes back, she comes back to a lot happier mom. A mom with a lot more patience and understanding. I wasn't that way in the beginning. Oh my gosh. How am I supposed to regulate a 4-year-old if I can't regulate a 40-year-old? And there are a lot of times I look back and I'm like, okay, you did the best with what you had at the time. And just moving forward in such a more aligned place of gratitude for the time that we still have together, that I didn't screw it all up. Because man, if I could go back to her 4-year-old now, it will be amazing. But I also am much more healed. I don't even know if that's the right way to word that, but I'm much more whole. And I don't need someone else to. I used to think that was the greatest quote ever in Jerry Maguire. You complete me. That's the biggest nonsense ever. Since when do we need somebody else to complete us? We have to be in a whole relationship with ourselves. Absolutely. To show up for others.
And so, Katie, I'd love it if you'd share, what are you working on now that excites you? Is there anything that's like down the road that you're creating right now that you want to share with us?
Well, I am actually getting ready to retire from my airline job next year. And I'm working on a mentorship program for divorced women and speaking and engaging with those women where they're at. And then in turn, finding that adventuresome side through travel. So there's some pieces that are coming together that are going to be big over the next year and a half. So
that's beautiful. But I mean, there's so much that can evolve out of that. I can just put you in a faraway land doing things and having a virtual, world of women you're mentoring. That's amazing. Do you have any key truths you want to share with our listeners before we close? Like even one or two that really can hit home for us that we can use as some strong takeaways?
When we trust ourselves, we can move forward in more light and alignment and have true joy and peace.
Katie, this conversation has been so great. And I want to thank you for being so honest about your story and just really opening up for a powerful conversation. We all can take away from this. It's a reminder that divorce is not an ending, but it's a transformation. And we can grieve and rebuild simultaneously, right? And shame doesn't have to be a part of our story. I think that's a really big takeaway as well. Shame doesn't have to be a part of our story. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
One thing that I took away that was really strong, I thought, was you were vulnerable and shared like your deepest pain. It sounds like, especially now, to even more so with these new developments, you're turning it into your most purposeful work. And you're not just kind of like getting through it. You're not teaching people how to get through a divorce or how to survive a divorce, but you're literally sharing, hey, you can shine and connect with yourself and have this huge, new, beautiful season of life that's ahead of you, whatever that'll look like for them. And that, to me, I love, because it's just you're healing from within and then you're shining hope and happiness on their future. So thank you for sharing that.
Such a special conversation. Really, really special. Thank you so very much. And to everyone listening, if you're in the aftermath of divorce or any ending that's shaken your sense of self, please hear this. You're not too broken. You're not too old. You're not too late. You get to rebuild. You get to create a life that feels good, and you don't have to do it alone. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone navigating their own new chapter. And be sure to check out Katie's book, Start Up, Start Over, Just Start, and her coaching work. And you'll get all of her contact information in our show notes. So be sure to take note of how you can reach out to Katie. And as we always say here on Soul Shift, small shifts create the biggest transformations. And sometimes the most powerful shift is simply giving yourself permission to begin again. And if you're new here, welcome. Welcome to the Soul Shift community. Welcome to the Soul Shift family. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and join us every week as we explore the moments that change us, the nervous system behind it all, and how to come home to yourself in the middle of it, even if the middle feels messy. So until next time, keep shifting your mind, keep igniting your soul, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you for sharing the sacred time today.
We hope something in this conversation touched your heart
And offered nourishment for your soul's journey.
Remember, transformation is most effortless when it happens one tender shift at a time.
Until next week, we invite you to carry one insight from today into your life.
Not as a task.
Think of it as a superpower to yourself.
If something resonated, we'd love to hear from you. If you're joining us on YouTube, feel free to leave us a comment below.
Your words ripple outward, offering connection and comfort to others walking this path beside you.
If Soul Shift feels like home, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review.
Your support will help us reach more hearts that need to hear they're not alone.
We're holding you in love, so know you're not alone. Your journey matters.
May your heart be filled.
And may your path be filled with grace.